Kansas, 1943. The biting wind whipped across the vast plains, carrying with it the scent of unfamiliar earth. Inside the crowded, rattling cattle car, Sergeant Klaus Richter, a veteran of the Eastern Front, clutched the worn photograph of his wife. His fingers, calloused from years of gripping a rifle, traced the faded lines of her smile. His stomach, hollowed by weeks of meager rations and the constant anxiety of capture, tightened further with each jolting lurch of the train. He expected the clank of chains, the harsh barks of guards, the grim reality of a defeated foe. He pictured concrete bunkers, the cold steel of prison bars, and the mocking faces of his captors. Instead, through a gap in the wooden slats, a sliver of sunlit Kansas landscape flashed by, revealing what looked like a freshly painted white picket fence bordering neat rows of bungalows. The juxtaposition was jarring, almost absurd, a vision that defied all his expectations. The air wasn't filled with the stench of despair or the metallic tang of fear, but the faint, sweet scent of newly mown hay, strangely incongruous with his situation. German POWs, indoctrinated to expect Allied brutality and certain death, instead discovered an astonishing oasis of hospitals, productive ice plants, and even vibrant musical concerts deep in the heart of rural Kansas at Camp Concordia. Their chains were invisible, forged not of iron, but of an unexpected kindness that would challenge everything they believed. From what unexpected corner of the world are you watching this story unfold? Drop a comment below and let us know, because this tale from a forgotten chapter of War II is about to twist your expectations of wartime captivity. Sergeant Klaus Richter was not just a soldier, he was a true believer. Born into the grim post-World War I Germany, a nation scarred by humiliation and economic ruin, he had witnessed the rise of the Führer as the dawn of a new, glorious era, a promise of order and strength. He joined the Wehrmacht with unwavering conviction, his young mind filled with visions of national revival and imperial destiny. He had fought across Poland, feeling the exhilaration of swift victory, through France, marveling at the efficiency of the blitzkrieg, and then plunged into the frozen, unforgiving hell of Russia, where the ideological fervor met the brutal reality of an endless, merciless war. His unwavering loyalty was etched into his very being, hardened by years of relentless propaganda, the shared sacrifices of his comrades, and the perceived righteousness of their cause. For Klaus, the Allied forces were weak, decadent, and driven by a vengeful thirst for retribution. Nazi propaganda had painted a vivid, terrifying picture of American and British soldiers as brutal, godless automatons, devoid of human feeling, eager to inflict cruelty upon their enemies. Captured Germans, they were constantly told, faced certain torture, starvation, and a slow, agonizing demise, a fate worse than death itself. This belief was not merely theoretical, it was an article of faith, reinforced by whispered rumors from the front lines and the grim realities of the Eastern Front where no quarter was often given or expected. Surrender meant dishonor, and likely, death. He had prepared himself for the worst, steeling his heart against any show of weakness, resolving to face whatever torment awaited him with stoic defiance. The journey across the Atlantic had been a nightmare of confinement and fear. Packed below deck, the constant thrum of the ship's engines vibrated through his bones. The nauseating roll of the waves churned his stomach, and the stale air, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and collective fear, clung to him like a shroud. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every distant shout an impending doom. The sight of the American coastline brought no relief, only a fresh wave of dread. He imagined being herded into massive, impersonal camps, surrounded by barbed wire, and menacing watchtowers, populated by armed guards with snarls on their faces, ready to mete out their promised vengeance. His hand instinctively went to the spot on his chest where his iron cross should have been, a medal he had lost in the chaos of battle, a small comfort now denied him. He closed his eyes, bracing himself, every fiber of his being prepared for the inevitable degradation, the final humiliating chapter of his war. The train groaned, its metal wheels shrieking against the rails, and finally shuddered to a halt. The doors, heavy and unforgiving, slid open with a metallic clang, revealing not the expected armed convoy or the grim, foreboding compound, but a surprisingly calm scene. American MPs stood guard, certainly, their rifles held loosely, but their expressions were not of hatred or triumph, but of weary professionalism. The air, crisp and clean, carried the scent of dry earth and distant prairie. As Klaus stepped onto the platform, his boots crunching on the gravel, he saw a simple wooden sign, Camp Concordia. Beyond the platform, rather than menacing watchtowers or high concrete walls, stood neatly arranged wooden barracks, freshly painted in shades of brown and green, their windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Surrounding them were vast open fields that looked suspiciously like sports grounds. It was orderly, almost pristine, a stark contrast to the bombed-out ruins he had left behind in Europe. And then came the first truly disorienting sensory input, the rich, comforting aroma of freshly baked bread wafting from a nearby building, mingling with the earthy scent of the Kansas soil. It was so unexpected, so utterly incongruous, that it felt like a hallucination. Klaus's jaw tightened. This was wrong. This was a trick, an elaborate deception. His comrades, their faces gaunt and dirt-streaked, exchanged bewildered glances, their expressions mirroring his own profound confusion and deep suspicion. "What is this place?" whispered a young corporal next to him, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Klaus could offer no answer. He scanned the faces of the American guards, searching desperately for the malice he expected, the glint of cruelty, but found only impassivity, a professional detachment that offered no easy interpretations. The contrast between his deeply ingrained expectations and this baffling reality was a visceral punch to the gut, leaving him dizzy with a profound sense of cognitive dissonance. He couldn't reconcile what he had been taught with what his eyes and nose now reported. Camp Concordia, one of over 500 POW camps established across the United States during the war, would eventually house over 4,000 German prisoners of war, a figure that alone underscored the sheer, almost unimaginable scale of America's unexpected hospitality. From a declassified U.S. Army report on POW processing, initial observations indicate a significant level of surprise among newly arrived prisoners regarding camp conditions, which consistently exceed their pre-captivity expectations of treatment under the Geneva Convention. Barely a week into his internment, Klaus witnessed something that began to chip away at the formidable wall of his indoctrination, shaking him to his core. A young German soldier, Private Schmidt, who had arrived with a festering, deeply infected wound from a grenade fragment suffered in the hedgerows of Normandy, was swiftly transferred to the camp hospital. Klaus expected a makeshift infirmary, perhaps bare medical attention, certainly no more than was absolutely necessary to keep him alive. He imagined a dirty cot in a dark room, crude instruments, and reluctant care. Instead, Schmidt returned 2 weeks later, not only visibly healed but looking remarkably healthier, his skin no longer pale and drawn, his eyes brighter. He had undergone what American doctors called minor surgery. Schmidt spoke, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence of clean white beds, antiseptic smells, regular nourishing meals, and skilled nurses who treated him not as an enemy, but as a patient. He described a level of medical professionalism Klaus had not seen since the early, triumphant days of the Eastern Front, before the supply lines withered and the war became a brutal attrition. The Camp Concordia Hospital, Schmidt explained, boasted 200 beds, 2 fully equipped operating theaters, a dedicated dental clinic for all manner of ailments, and even a psychiatric ward, staffed by American doctors and nurses, and occasionally German medical personnel among the POWs themselves, working side by side. Records indicate an astonishingly low mortality rate for POWs within the American system, far below that of soldiers fighting on the front lines, a testament to the comprehensive and unwavering care provided. Excerpt from a letter smuggled out by a German POW at another Kansas camp, dated March 1944. "They treat our wounded better than our own army sometimes. It makes you wonder. My friend Hans lost an arm, but they saved his life, and he is recovering well, even getting a prosthetic. Don't understand it." Klaus felt a profound, unsettling unease. This level of meticulous care, this unexpected compassion, starkly contradicted every piece of propaganda he had absorbed, every hateful caricature of the enemy. He saw the genuine relief and burgeoning gratitude in Schmidt's eyes, a silent testament to the Americans' unexpected humanity. It was becoming increasingly harder to demonize an enemy who mended your comrades, who diligently patched up the very men who had fought against them. Doubt, a dangerous seed, began to sprout in his mind, unsettling the neatly ordered world of his beliefs. He observed the other POWs, some expressing open admiration, a few even shedding tears of quiet gratitude, while others, more hardened or wary, whispered suspicion that it was merely a calculated Allied ploy to extract information, a sophisticated form of psychological warfare. Klaus found himself torn, adrift between these two opposing interpretations, the reality before him challenging the very core of his wartime identity. The work detail assignments were equally baffling, further deepening the fissures in his understanding. Klaus, expecting backbreaking, purposeless labor designed to break their spirits or exact revenge, was instead assigned to the Camp Concordia ice plant, a surprisingly sophisticated industrial facility, vital for supplying ice to local towns, farms, and military installations across the region. He wasn't digging futile trenches or breaking rocks under a scorching sun. He was operating machinery, learning the intricate processes of refrigeration and production, acquiring a new civilian trade. The work was undeniably demanding, requiring long hours and physical exertion, but it was fair, purposeful, and, most surprisingly, paid. They received payment in camp scrip, a special currency that could be exchanged for goods at the camp canteen. The Camp Concordia's ice plant alone produced thousands of tons of ice per month, significantly contributing to the local wartime economy, ensuring that produce reached markets fresh and that nearby military bases had cold storage for vital supplies. POWs earned 80 cents per day in scrip for their labor, a sum that allowed them to purchase tobacco, toiletries, writing paper, and even small gifts for their families, should the censor allow them to be sent. In total, over 10,000 German POWs across Kansas contributed over 5 million man-hours to various essential labor projects, from harvesting wheat to constructing infrastructure, effectively bolstering the American war effort from within. From a local Concordia newspaper article, summer 1944, German POWs prove invaluable asset to local economy, assisting with harvests and essential industries like the ice plant, contributing significantly to the war effort on the home front. The ice plant became a microcosm of the camp's unexpected reality. Working alongside his fellow Germans, but under the watchful yet surprisingly lenient eyes of American foremen, Klaus saw camaraderie bloom, not just among the prisoners, but often extending to the American overseers. He learned about refrigeration cycles, about the rhythms of civilian life in rural America, a world so far removed from the battlefields. He observed men who had been fervent, unyielding Nazis slowly, subtly, begin to discuss topics beyond the war, future prospects, their families back home, and the unexpected skills they were acquiring. The dignified labor, the ability to earn and purchase small luxuries, created a fragile but potent semblance of normalcy that further blurred the rigid lines of enemy, replacing them with the shared humanity of hard work and basic needs. But it was the cultural life that truly shattered Klaus's remaining preconceptions, leaving him feeling adrift in a sea of conflicting realities. One humid Kansas evening, after a long day at the ice plant, the faint melodic strains of classical music drifted from the recreation hall. Curiosity, mixed with a deep skepticism and a suspicion of another American trick, pulled him towards the sound. Inside, the scene was utterly bewildering. A makeshift orchestra, comprised entirely of German POWs, many of whom he recognized from the barracks, was performing a Brandenburg concerto. The sound was rich, complex, utterly beautiful, filling the cavernous hall with a timeless elegance. The camp, it turned out, also boasted a library stocked with thousands of books, many in German, allowing them to read Goethe, Schiller, and Kant. There were sports leagues for football, soccer, and volleyball, and even a theater group diligently rehearsing plays, bringing Shakespeare and German classics to life. These, he realized with a growing sense of bewilderment, were not the instruments of oppression, but the vessels of culture, intellect, and spiritual solace. Camp Concordia boasted a library with over 3,000 books, offered dozens of correspondence courses through local universities, a chance for prisoners to earn academic credit, and hosted weekly musical performances, plays, and film screenings. Over 30% of POWs actively participated in educational programs, and camp records show at least 5 successful theatrical productions mounted by German prisoners, complete with costumes and painted backdrops. Program leaflet from a Camp Concordia concert, 1945. The Concordia POW Orchestra proudly presents works by Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, performed by the talented musicians of the German Wehrmacht. Watching his fellow soldiers, men who had once marched to the martial rhythms of the Third Reich, now pour their hearts and souls into classical music, their faces wrapped with concentration and emotion, Klaus felt a profound, almost dizzying shift within himself. The concerts were not just entertainment. They were powerful expressions of shared humanity, a connection to a cultural heritage that transcended the brutality of war. He saw men weep openly during familiar German folk songs, finding a solace he hadn't realized he craved, a balm for the deep wounds of exile and uncertainty. The camp, far from being the cage he had anticipated, was transforming into a strange, unexpected sanctuary, a place where the cultural fabric of home was unexpectedly nurtured, cultivated, and preserved, rather than eradicated. Each note, each page, each moment of shared artistic expression subtly undermined the rigid ideological framework he had carried into captivity, making him question the very nature of his enemies. The true nature of Camp Concordia wasn't just accidental kindness or an oversight. It was a deliberate, calculated strategy, a moral gambit rooted deeply in the humanitarian principles of the Geneva Convention, and a profound, almost visionary belief in the power of rehabilitation over simple retribution. One humid Kansas evening, the air thick with the buzzing of cicadas and the distant mournful whistle of a train, Klaus, struggling with a broken part in the ice plant machinery, found himself working late. He overheard a hushed, earnest conversation between his American foreman, Mr. Johnson, a man of few words but kind eyes, and the camp's commanding officer, the stoic and thoughtful Colonel Davies. "Sir, sometimes I wonder if we're being too soft on them," Johnson muttered, wiping sweat from his brow with a greasy rag, his voice tinged with the understandable frustration of a man whose own son was fighting overseas. "My boy's fighting in the Pacific, dodging bullets, and we're giving these Krauts concerts, ice cream, and educational degrees. It just doesn't sit right, Colonel." Colonel Davies sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of command and the complexities of human nature. His voice, though low, was firm and unwavering. "Mr. Johnson, we're not being soft. We're upholding the law, the Geneva Convention, which is not just an agreement but a reflection of who we are as a nation. And more importantly, we're demonstrating our values. These men will eventually go home. What message do we want them to carry back to Germany? That America is a land of barbaric savages, no different from the regime they fought for, or that even in the midst of total war, we can extend humanity, respect, and a belief in a better future? It's not just about winning the war. It's about winning the peace that follows, Mr. Johnson. A peace that must be built on something more enduring than simple military victory. And perhaps, just perhaps, showing them a different way of life, a different system, a more humane philosophy, might plant a seed of doubt in their loyalty to a regime that taught them only hatred and conquest. Klaus, hidden by the shadows of the large ice machinery, froze. The words hung in the air, transforming his entire understanding of his captivity, shattering the last vestiges of his ingrained propaganda. This wasn't weakness. It was a profound strategic strength. It wasn't a trick designed to extract information. It was a long-game strategy, a subtle, deeply embedded form of re-education through the unwavering practice of respect and dignity. The enemy, he realized with a chilling clarity, wasn't just fighting with bullets and bombs. They were fighting with decency, with principles, with an unexpected and unsettling humanity. This revelation was a profound shock, a tectonic shift within his worldview, shaking the very foundations of his ingrained ideology and flipping his perception of Allied intentions inside out. The moral weight of this understanding settled heavily upon him, forcing him to confront the disturbing possibility that everything he had been taught about his enemies, everything he had believed and fought for, was a profound, devastating lie. The psychological stakes for the German POWs were immense, almost immeasurable. Each concert, each nourishing meal, each respectful interaction with an American guard or civilian chipped away relentlessly at the formidable edifice of Nazi indoctrination that had been so carefully constructed over years. For men like Klaus, loyalty to the Führer and the sacred fatherland was not merely a political stance, but a solemn vow, a guiding principle that had defined their lives and justified their actions. But the daily reality of humane treatment, the unexpected kindness, the opportunity for intellectual and cultural engagement, created a profound, agonizing internal conflict. How could he, or any of them, continue to harbor pure, unadulterated hatred for those who healed his friends, fed them well, allowed them to read the timeless works of Goethe, and even learn new skills? The camp, in essence, became a psychological crucible where rigid ideology clashed violently with undeniable lived experience. Some, the unbending hardcore Nazis, resisted fiercely, retreating deeper into their fanaticism. They attempted to enforce rigid adherence to party lines, ostracizing, threatening, and sometimes even physically assaulting those who showed gratitude, expressed curiosity about American ways, or dared to question the Nazi narrative. Others, like Klaus, found themselves caught in a moral maelstrom, their minds a battleground of doubt. They questioned their beliefs, their past actions, their very identity as soldiers of the Reich. They pondered the true meaning of honor and the nature of victory and defeat, grappling with the disorienting notion that their captors might embody a greater morality than their own leaders. For the American guards and camp commandants, the ethical dilemma was equally complex and often emotionally draining. Upholding the stringent requirements of the Geneva Convention, which dictated humane treatment for prisoners of war, amidst a brutal global conflict where their own countrymen were dying at the hands of the very enemy they now housed, was a constant, difficult challenge. They had to balance the strictures of international law with the understandable emotional toll of fighting an enemy responsible for unspeakable atrocities. Colonel Davies and his staff walked a tightrope, maintaining discipline and security within the camp, preventing escapes or internal conflicts, while simultaneously facilitating cultural exchange, educational opportunities, and a fair living standard. They dealt with both defiant Nazi zealots, who openly challenged their authority and spread propaganda, and disillusioned young men, often barely out of their teens, who were clearly victims of a manipulative regime. This demanded immense patience, unwavering professionalism, and a steadfast, almost profound commitment to the principles of fair treatment, even for one's enemies. The subtle yet deeply effective denazification process, achieved through this humane treatment, while unquantifiable in direct battlefield impact, proved strategically vital for the nascent post-war future of Germany and Europe. Studies conducted in the post-war years indicated that POWs who experienced humane treatment within the American camp system returned to Germany with significantly reduced ideological extremism. They were less likely to harbor resentment, less susceptible to lingering fascist sentiments, and often became unexpected agents of democratic reconstruction rather than posing as lingering threats to stability. The long-term outcome wasn't just fewer acts of post-war resistance. It was the quiet, foundational work for reconciliation. The Camp Concordia effect, a philosophy of dignified captivity, quietly contributed to the remarkably successful reintegration of West Germany into the global community, transforming a vanquished foe into a democratic ally. It was an extraordinary testament, proving that kindness, when strategically and consistently applied, could be a powerful, almost revolutionary tool for peace, far beyond the reach of conventional weapons. The climax was not a thunderous battle of bullets and bombs, but a fierce battle of wills and ideologies that simmered and finally erupted within the seemingly peaceful confines of Camp Concordia. A particularly vocal, aggressive, and unrepentant group of hardcore Nazi POWs, led by the fanatical Oberleutnant Brandt, decided to stage a dramatic and destructive protest. Brandt, a man whose eyes still gleamed with unshakable zealotry, viewed the camp's relative comforts and the burgeoning cultural activities as an insult to the Reich. a betrayal of their fallen comrades. They refused to work, deliberately sabotaged equipment, though often in subtle ways to avoid outright punishment, disrupted meal times with loud, inflammatory speeches, and openly threatened any German POW who cooperated with the Americans or showed signs of weakness, which to Brandt meant any hint of gratitude or interest in American ways. Brandt, seizing on a symbolic target, declared that the upcoming camp-wide Christmas concert, a planned blend of German and American carols, a gesture of cultural exchange, was the ultimate symbol of defilement, an abomination. He vowed it would be sabotaged, its message of peace and shared humanity silenced. Klaus, who had secretly begun to teach rudimentary English to some of the younger, more inquisitive POWs, found himself at a profound crossroads. He had formed a quiet but deep bond with Schmidt, the soldier whose wound had been healed, and with Private Weber, a talented musician whose passionate violin playing had so often filled the recreation hall, pouring his soul into the camp orchestra. Brandt's threats were chillingly real, promising severe retribution, beatings, ostracization, perhaps even death, for anyone who defied him or participated in the concert. The battle had become a deeply personal, moral one for Klaus. Would he, once a true believer in the brutal tenets of his former regime, stand by and allow Brandt to destroy the fragile humanity, the unexpected solace they had found here? Or would he finally choose a different path, one that risked his own safety but affirmed his newfound, still-forming sense of right and wrong, a path that honored the unexpected decency of his captors? Klaus's internal monologue was a whirlwind of fear and defiance, a maelstrom of conflicting loyalties. The ingrained, almost genetic loyalty to the fatherland, hammered into him since childhood, wrestled fiercely with the clear, irrefutable evidence of the Americans' surprising decency, their consistent adherence to principles he had been taught to despise. He looked at Weber, his youthful eyes wide with fear, clutching his prized violin, clearly torn between his passion for music and the very real threats Brandt posed to his safety. Schmidt, physically recovered but still bearing the unseen scars of war, looked to Klaus for guidance, a silent plea for leadership. An American guard, Sergeant Miller, who had overseen Klaus at the ice plant and often exchanged quiet pleasantries with him about the weather or the intricacies of the machinery, observed the growing tension with a keen, watchful eye. His gaze was subtly but persistently fixed on Klaus, sensing the impending conflict, understanding the ideological struggle, but knowing he couldn't interfere directly in internal POW matters unless violence erupted. The air within the camp crackled with unspoken tension, thick with dread and anticipation. As the concert approached, the stage unwittingly set not just for music, but for a profound, life-altering choice that would define the very soul of Camp Concordia. The concert went ahead, a quiet yet profound victory for shared humanity over destructive ideology. Brandt's sinister sabotage attempts were subtly but effectively thwarted by a nascent network of POWs who, inspired by Klaus's quiet courage and growing moral clarity, refused to participate in the plot. Some even reported Brandt's more overt plans to sympathetic American guards, who then took measures to isolate the fanatical Oberleutnant without direct intervention in the POW population. Brandt found himself swiftly isolated, his power base crumbling as more and more prisoners, emboldened by the prospect of culture and dignity, chose the music over his venom. As the war drew to a close, the immediate result for the thousands of POWs like Klaus was the daunting, often bewildering process of repatriation to a homeland utterly devastated and profoundly changed. For many, leaving Camp Concordia was a strangely bittersweet experience. It had been a prison, yes, undeniably, but also, paradoxically, a school, a sanctuary, a place of unexpected transformation where their worldview had been irrevocably altered. Some, having formed genuine, respectful relationships with local American families through labor programs, or having found solace in the community activities, even expressed a sincere desire to remain in the United States, a powerful testament to the profound and unexpected impact of their experience. The stories of Camp Concordia and similar camps, with their surprising narratives of humane treatment and cultural exchange, became quiet whispers that rippled across a shattered post-war Germany. Men like Klaus, returning to a homeland physically and morally decimated, carried not just the bitter memories of defeat and the trauma of war, but also a nuanced, deeply personal understanding of their former enemies. This unexpected humanity, this direct experience of decency and principle, played a subtle yet profoundly significant role in fostering reconciliation between the former warring nations. These ex-POWs, many of whom had seen American democracy, kindness, and civic life firsthand, often became quiet but influential proponents of rebuilding Germany on democratic principles, their personal experiences serving as a powerful counter-narrative to decades of hateful, dehumanizing propaganda. Their voices, though not always loud, were authentic, offering first-hand accounts that contradicted the myths of enemy barbarism, helping to heal the psychological wounds of a nation. Today, Camp Concordia is a quiet, historical marker on the Kansas prairie, its original barracks long gone, replaced by sprawling farmland and the quiet hum of agricultural life. But its legacy echoes powerfully through time. Decades later, a young German historian, Dr. Anna Schmidt, driven by an insatiable curiosity about her family's past, discovers her grandfather's hidden diary in a dusty attic trunk. Within its fragile, yellowed pages, she finds not accounts of suffering and despair, but astonishing entries detailing his initial bewilderment at the hospital care, his surprising joy at playing music in the camp orchestra, and his profound, inarticulate gratitude for the human dignity he found in rural Kansas. Her scholarly journey, fueled by this extraordinary discovery, leads her eventually to Concordia, Kansas, where she meets the descendants of the American guards and townsfolk, forging a modern connection across generations, a living testament to the enduring power of kindness in the shadow of total war. The site now hosts a small, dedicated museum, carefully preserving the individual stories of those who arrived expecting nothing but chains, but found something far more profound, a seed of humanity that would eventually help reshape a nation. In the desolate landscape of global conflict, the unexpected gardens of human decency can flourish, forever changing the course of history, one life at a time. What if the truest victory in war isn't found on the battlefield, in the crushing of an enemy, but in the quiet, radical act of extending humanity to your perceived adversary? Hit that subscribe button if you want more untold stories from World War II that will make you question everything you thought you knew about history.